A very important teaching of the Buddha is about the value of contentment. We can be happy by being contented. Now what this means is all our unhappiness in the world, all the problems in the world is due to a very important reason. And that reason is, it is a conflict between our desires and the natural world around us. Things are not happening as we want. That is the biggest problem. So many things that happen in the world not as we want. We would like to have the world in a different way, but we cannot achieve it. So we become unhappy. We are frustrated and disappointed. That frustration and disappointment is the greatest problem, the unhappiness in the world. The inability to satisfy our desires. Today there is a subject that is taught in schools and even universities. It is called economics. What is this thing called economics? Once I went to study this thing called economics, and the first thing that I heard was that economics is about how human beings try to satisfy their wants with limited means. We have a countless number of wants. We want this, we want that, so many wants. But the means at our disposal is limited. That is why people go to find jobs. Why do people try to find jobs? Because they want money. And why do they want money? To satisfy their desires. Today the only way to satisfy desires is to have a lot of money. If you have a lot of money, you can get many things. But, there was a man in the United States who was very rich. He was at that time the richest man in the world. His name was Howard Hughes. He was a man who died as a very unhappy person, full of worries and anxieties, fears. There were people threatening to kill him. Why do people want to kill him? Just to get money. You may have heard of a recent thing that happened in the United States. There was this very famous musician, Michael Jackson. Someone wanted to get money from him because he had a lot of money. And he liked children so much that he made a large area called the place where children play. And children can come and play there or live there and enjoy. That's what he did with his money that he had. But someone filed a case against him that he was some kind of pervert and that he was spoiling the children and all kinds of things. Why did they do that? Just to get money. And the government got a lot of money from him by charging him for all those things. And the person who filed a case against him also, I suppose, got money from that. So many things happen to people who have money. And there are some who just become friends and come and try to enjoy using the rich person's money. But there are also enemies who feel jealous and also try to threaten him to get money. So having a lot of money doesn't mean that you will be happy. You see, so this is why the Buddha taught that the right way to happiness is not to try to collect a lot of money or even to get wealth and properties and riches of all kinds, but to practice contentment. It is only when we are able to reduce our wants, reduce our desires, that we can be really happy. And we'll have less enemies also, so that people won't feel jealous. So it's very important to learn. But the problem is, when we think of our mind, there are two parts that we call the mind. These are really activities. Mind is not another entity like the body, which is inside the body or someplace like that. There is no such thing. What we call the mind is simply the activity of the body. Like the engine of a motor car. When the engine begins to work, it can pull the car and go anywhere. But if the engine is there without working, even for 100 years, the car won't be moving. So if you want to get the car to move, you'll have to switch on the engine. And you also need what is called petrol. So like that, in this body also we have certain activities like the heart beating. Even breathing in and out is an activity that is going on all the time, whether we are aware of it or not. And there are other activities going on in the body, like digestion, the movements in the intestines, and even other activities in other organs like the liver, the kidneys, and so many other organs in the body. They are active all the time. If they are not active, then you are dead. So these activities are going on all the time. But there is another special activity, which is the activity of what is called the nervous system, with the brain, the spinal cord, and the other nerves all around in the body. The activity of that is what we call the mind. So when we speak of the mind, there is also a thinking part of the mind. And another part is what we call the emotional part. When we become angry, that is an emotion. Or if we have desires for things, that is also emotion. If we have fear, that is an emotion. If we have worries, that is an emotion. So these emotions are simply an activity of the body. It's not so much to do with thinking, but it is the thinking that starts the emotion. The thinking is the activity of the brain. So when we open our eyes and see things, or we hear things, smell things, taste things, all that is the activity of the senses. And these messages go from the senses to the brain, and the brain begins to interpret and give meaning to what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch. And according to the way we give the meaning, emotions are aroused. The emotions are aroused according to the meaning we give to what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Now, this is also the thinking part, where we think about the world, we think about what is happening in the world, and according to the way we think, our emotions come in the form of desires or hatreds or anger or fears, worries. All these things come. And that is the emotion. But the emotions are blind. Emotions are not able to think. So these two parts of the mind that is working, it's like a blind man carrying a lame man on the shoulders. The lame person is a person who can't walk. The legs are broken or crippled or something has happened to the legs. The legs can't walk. The blind man cannot see. But the lame person can see. So what the blind man does is carries the lame person on his shoulders and says, now you can see, I can't see, but you cannot walk, so I can walk. So we can unite. You show me the way, and I will do the walking. So, when we do that, that person who is able to see can see the way and say, now you turn right from here, now there is a car or some vehicle is coming, so you'll have to move aside, and that sort of thing. The lame person with the eyes can see. And the blind man who can't see will listen to this lay person and then walk according to the way this person says. So these two parts of the mind is like that. One part can think, and the other part is a part that wants this and that. It is also like the child and the mother. The mother carrying a child. The child wants certain things, but the child is not able to get what the child wants. And the mother can get what the child wants. If the child wants, say, I want ice cream, and then the mother can go and get the ice cream. But the problem is that thinking part also knows what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. But that emotional part doesn't know what is right and wrong, good and bad, like the child. Now the child wants ice cream, and the mother says, no, you should not be eating too much ice cream. Or if the child wants to do something else, the child might see a flame and want to touch the flame. Or the child might want to put something into the mouth which is not the right thing to do. So, the mother has to say no to certain things, to show what is right and what is wrong. So in the same way, this thinking part is also telling you what is right, what is wrong. But the emotion says, no, I want this, I want that. I don't care whether it is right or wrong, I just want that. So conflicts come up between the thinking part and the emotional part. And that conflict is what is creating all the problems. There was a psychologist called Sigmund Freud who tried to help these mentally sick people, and he discovered these things. Although he couldn't finally solve the problem fully, but it was the Buddha who really solved the problem. That is why he could become a Buddha. And he could make other people also become Buddhas or Arahants. Now all that is because he understood the mind in the proper way. He understood that being carried away by emotions, we can't really find happiness. If we begin to do what the emotions tell us to do, we'll be unhappy people. So we should be guided by the thinking part, which we call the intellect or the intelligence. So it is only by living in an intelligent way or a wise way, wisdom, and that is how we can really be happy. And that means we have to learn to gain control over our emotions. It is only by learning to gain control over our emotions that we can find true happiness. But normally people think to be happy, we must gratify the emotions. By trying to gratify emotions, we won't really become happy. We become unhappy as a result. This is what the Buddha pointed out. Because we cannot have pleasures all the time. And we cannot avoid pain all the time. Pleasure and pain are things that come and go. So if we try to have pleasures all the time, we'll become unhappy. If we try to avoid pain all the time, we become unhappy. So when the Buddha spoke about suffering or unhappiness, he was not talking about the pleasure or the pain. Very often people think when the Buddha spoke about unhappiness, he was talking about pain. It's not pain that he was talking about. And when he spoke about happiness, people think that he was speaking about pleasure. Pleasure and happiness are two different things. Pleasure is a sensation. If you see pleasant things, that is pleasure. If you hear pleasant music, that is pleasure. If you smell pleasant perfumes, that is pleasure. If you taste tasty food, that is pleasure. If you touch pleasant touches, that is pleasure. But if we go on seeking pleasures in this way, we won't be able to have pleasure all the time. So we become unhappy. And pleasures are also impermanent. They are not going to stay with us all the time. And the pleasures can part from us, go away from us. And therefore we become unhappy as a result. So the only way to be happy, what the Buddha pointed out, was not to seek pleasure and avoid pain, but to get rid of the desire for pleasure and to get rid of the hatred of pain. It is this desire and hatred that makes us unhappy. Because the moment a desire arises in the mind, our body becomes tensed. And when the body becomes tensed, the body becomes uncomfortable. It is to get rid of this discomfort that we begin to make the effort to get what we want, or to get rid of what we hate, or to run away from what we fear. Or even to cry when something we cannot do. All that is an expression of our desire to get things as we want. So what Buddha pointed out was, if we want to be happy, we have to learn to gain control over our desires, our hatreds, calm the mind, relax the body, free the mind of all these emotional disturbances. Emotion is a disturbance of the body and the mind. So this is why we have to learn to gain control over our emotions. The really happy mind is not an excited mind, but a calm and tranquil mind. This is why even those who talk about stress and stress management, they talk about relaxing the body and calming the mind. That is the way to true happiness. So that is what we should learn. And this is what we learn when we learn to meditate. So meditation is really a way to happiness. If we want to be happy, we should learn to meditate. This is the important thing. But most people think meditation is an effort to concentrate. That is the wrong method of meditation. Concentration is not meditation. Concentration is fixing your mind to something. It is like tying a dog to a post. If the dog is troublesome, you can tie the dog to a post. But by tying the dog to a post, we are not making the dog a good dog. Because the moment we let the dog loose, the dog will run about and dance and do all kinds of things, and we can't control it. But the right thing to do is to teach the dog how to behave. And today there are people who teach how to train dogs. And they learn to train dogs. So in the same way, when we meditate, we should not be trying to concentrate, which is like tying the dog to a post. Instead of trying to concentrate, we should learn to gain control over the mind by learning to relax the body and calm the mind. So it is by learning to relax the body and calm the mind that we learn to gain control over, not by fighting with the emotion. So, this is the important message that I want to give you today, that the right way to happiness is to learn to gain control over the emotions, not by fighting with the emotions, but by learning to relax the body and calm the mind.
Bhante has kindly opened the floor for you to ask your questions, to clear up your doubts. Can we have a show of hands? How many questions are there? Just one. Please come to the microphone. Come.
Morning, Reverend sir. Reverend mentioned about the Mr. Howard Hughes, who is considered as the richest man in America. Howard Hughes, Bhante mentioned about Howard Hughes. So he led, yes, supposedly he led a very bad life, but in a way that he suffered from OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, whereby he used to wash his hand very vigorously, so much so that he will bring soap in a metal box, and he will have that soap with him most of this time for him to wash his hand until his hands bleed in trying to wash himself. No doubt that he was the richest man at that time, and he led a very bad life, but he suffered from OCD, whereby he had this fear of contamination. We agree that this fear is false fear, as they mentioned the acronym of fear, FEAR, as false evidence appear real. In taking Howard Hughes' case in retrospective, Bhante, how could Buddhism, if I may solicit Bhante's vast experience in psychology, together with Buddhism, how could Buddhism address this problem? Having fear in the mind, having this, he was clinically diagnosed as having OCD. If I may, Reverend, thank you.
Well, I think what you are talking about is a a common psychological problem. Washing hands, and some people wash hands like that till the hands begin to bleed also. Yeah. And this is really coming from a part of the mind which is a feeling of guilt. And things like this, the modern psychologists are aware of it. And the thing is that we have to understand that I told you there are two parts of the mind. Sigmund Freud spoke about three parts of the mind, which that emotional part he called the id, and the thinking part he called the ego. And that third part, which is commonly called the conscience. And that is what makes you feel guilty. Now, if you are a person who has been brought up in a very strict way by your parents or whoever is looking after the child, so you as a child, you are brought up in a very strict way where you have been punished for doing something wrong, and always the parents or whoever is trying to control you in various ways. That means you develop what is called a very strong conscience. And the slightest thing that you do, you begin to feel guilty. And then as a child, you are not able to understand why this is. That means the child is not able to understand and control the emotions. It is the emotion that makes you do the wrong things. And it is the thinking part that tells you what is right and what is wrong. But unfortunately, the child, the thinking part is not grown up yet. This is why the adult has to look after the child. Because it is only when the child grows up into adulthood gradually that the thinking part begins to work and function. And then that thinking part will be able to tell you what is good and bad. But till that thinking part is properly developed, what happens is the conscience begins to control you. So it is the conscience that begins to help the child to feel guilty about the wrong things and then to do things in the correct way. But when the emotions come up, the child doesn't know how to get rid of it. So what the child does is, throw it into the unconscious. The unconscious means you forget it. You try to forget your emotion. So the child, without knowing, forgets the emotion. But the feeling of guilt can remain. And the guilt now takes a different form. And comes in the form of the unclean hands. This is only one case. There are other ways of the repressed. This is what is called repression. And that repressed emotion comes up in a camouflage form, in a different form. And so the child, when grown up, will still having this problem because that emotion that is repressed is trying to come out. And it comes out in a different way, where the person even doesn't know what it is. There is only an urge to clean yourself. Now that urge to clean yourself physically is not what it is. The real problem is that feeling of guilt. I have done something wrong. So this is why the Freudian method was to get this person to recall the past. By recalling the past, this person can find out what has really happened. Now, another case that is commonly quoted is there was a girl, now a young woman, and she's frightened of closed spaces. When that person goes to a place where you are closed, you become panicky, frightened. So this person, Sigmund Freud, who was a psychologist, was able to get this person to recall the past, what happened as a child. And then she recalled that this woman, who was now a woman, when she was a child, she happened to open a small closet that was shut down, and as she opened the closet, there was a dog inside and started barking, and she got frightened of the dog. And it was that fear that ultimately was forgotten, and it came up in the form of fear of closed spaces. So that is a psychological problem that comes up. So the hand washing is also a similar thing. And today there is really a psychologist who is not only just getting people to recall the childhood experiences. This person can put a person in the hypnotic state and get that person to recall the past lives. And sometimes the problem is not even in childhood. The problem is in some past life. And when that life is recalled, the problem disappears. Now even in the sutras, we have cases where the Buddha, someone has a problem, some psychological problem, and what the Buddha does is, the Buddha can read that person's mind and tells a story about the past life. And when that person hears the story, the problem is cured. So the Buddha did things like that. When you read the sutras and some of the stories about the Buddha, you get these things. Stories where the Buddha recalls the past life. So some of these problems, psychological problems that people have, is not merely in childhood that it started. Sometimes it started in a previous life. And it is possible to cure these things by doing that, getting people to recall the past. So that is what we can talk about that.